Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're literally popping the hood on our body's engine to take a deep and honestly super fascinating look at a condition affecting millions of people, yet it's totally misunderstood. We're talking about fatty liver disease. We're going to break down the complex science into clear pieces so you can truly grasp what's happening inside the human body. So grab your mental wrench and let's get to work.
Okay, let's dive right into this. When we hear fatty liver, our immediate reaction is to focus entirely on, well, the liver. We picture this isolated organ just malfunctioning, or maybe we think it's simply overwhelmed by alcohol. But is fatty liver really just an isolated liver problem? No way. The answer is a resounding no. Actually, most cases of fatty liver today aren't isolated liver diseases at all. Instead, they're more like these bright red flashing warning signs of a much larger, whole-body issue.
Section 1. The fatty liver myth.
To truly get a handle on this, we've got to stop viewing the liver as just some standalone independent filter. We need to start seeing it for what it truly is, a central metabolic traffic hub. And to show you just how much the medical understanding has evolved here, consider this shift. We used to focus heavily on ALD, right, where alcohol directly burdens the liver. But recently, the medical community actually changed the name for non-alcohol cases to MSLD. That's metabolic dysfunction-associated steatotic liver disease. That name change, it's a massive deal. It proves the scientific community now fully recognizes that the underlying issue isn't just some localized fat in the liver. The real culprit is metabolic dysfunction happening throughout your entire body.
Section 2. The metabolic traffic jam.
So I want you to imagine your body's energy management system as a bustling, high-speed highway right in the absolute peak of evening rush hour. What's causing all this traffic? Well, it's our modern metabolic environment. We're constantly bombarded by highly processed foods, excess calories, and chronic stress, all while living these largely sedentary lifestyles and getting terrible sleep. And let's be real for a second, it is incredibly hard to navigate this modern setup. But biologically, what this does is force way more energy into our bodies than we can actively use or safely store. It basically creates this massive initial backup on our metabolic highways.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is when that energy traffic gets simply too heavy, the liver becomes the body's metabolic overflow sink. It's exactly like a massive traffic jam on the interstate that eventually forces all the cars to back up onto local side roads and neighborhood intersections. All that excess, unprocessed energy, it has to go somewhere. And in our bodies, that backlog accumulates directly inside the liver cells in the form of excess fat.
Section 3. 3 steps to overload.
So we know the environment causes the traffic jam, right? But how does that jam systematically crash into the liver? Well, it happens in a very precise 3-step cascade. First, the body develops insulin resistance. Second, our fat tissue starts improperly releasing fat. And third, the liver is forced to take on the massive resulting burden. Let's look at each of these steps up close.
Step 1 is our yellow light. This is essentially the check engine warning of our metabolism, insulin resistance. Now, normally, insulin is the hormone that moves glucose from our bloodstream into our cells for energy. But, driven by things like excess belly fat, lack of movement, and highly processed diets, our cells just start ignoring the signal. They literally resist the insulin. So, in a panic, the pancreas tries to compensate by pumping out even more insulin. Your blood sugar regulation gets highly inefficient and insulin levels stay chronically high. The traffic is slowing down to an absolute crawl.
Then we hit step 2, which is fascinating, but also, a bit alarming. Fat leakage. Under healthy conditions, your fat tissue is a perfectly safe storage depot for excess energy. Insulin acts as the gatekeeper, keeping that fat securely locked away. But when that fat tissue becomes insulin resistant, the gate just breaks wide open. The tissue completely stops suppressing fat release. As a result, all these free fatty acids start leaking out, flowing directly into your bloodstream and speeding straight down the highway toward the liver. Now, what's really interesting here is step 3, which introduces a slightly intimidating scientific term, de novo lipogenesis. See, the liver is now receiving this massive flood of fatty acids from your fat tissue, but it's also dealing with incoming carbohydrates and sugars from your diet. To handle this absolute surplus of energy, the liver initiates de novo lipogenesis. That quite literally translates to making new fat. The liver is basically forced to convert all those excess carbs directly into even more fat. And we absolutely have to issue a specific warning here about fructose. Unlike glucose, which can be burned for energy by muscles all over the body, fructose is processed almost exclusively in the liver.
So, when you consume massive amounts of refined carbohydrates, sugary beverages, and artificial sweeteners, you're heavily stimulating that new fat creation directly in the liver. But hey, please don't panic about the apples or berries sitting in your fridge right now. Whole fruits are perfectly safe. Their high fiber, water content, and lower caloric density naturally limit your intake and slow absorption. They keep your liver perfectly happy.
But if those refined sugars and that fat leakage just keep continuing, we hit the red light: mitochondrial stress. The mitochondria are those tiny power plants inside your liver cells that are responsible for burning energy. As the flood of fat continues, these power plants are forced into overdrive until they essentially overheat. This overload creates intense oxidative stress, generates damaging free radicals, and promotes severe inflammation. You're now trapped in this vicious cycle, where fat accumulation breeds inflammation, which worsens insulin resistance, which then creates even more fat.
Section 4. Impact beyond the liver.
So, the liver is officially bogged down. But remember what we established right at the beginning? This is not just a liver problem. A traffic jam of this magnitude always spills over into the surrounding neighborhoods. When the liver is inflamed and packed with fat, it releases these inflammatory molecules that circulate throughout your entire vascular system. It's a systemic fallout. It accelerates the progression toward type 2 diabetes by totally messing with your blood sugar. It stresses the kidneys. It even impacts the brain. In fact, scientists are intensely studying the liver-brain axis right now, noting that metabolic dysfunction in the liver is closely tied to cognitive decline, depression, and neurodegenerative diseases. And this brilliantly illustrates the true gravity of the situation. Number 1. Cardiovascular disease is the #1 leading cause of death among individuals with MASLD. I mean, let that sink in for a second. The primary threat to someone with a fatty liver isn't liver failure, it's heart disease and stroke. The exact same metabolic disturbances causing fat to build up in the liver are simultaneously causing atherosclerosis and inflammation in your heart's arteries. It is completely 100% a connected system. Section 5. Restoring metabolic balance. Now, I know we've spent a lot of time sitting in that red light danger zone, but here is your green light. Unlike many chronic degenerative diseases that cause permanent structural damage, fatty liver is incredibly unique because it is highly responsive to lifestyle changes. The liver is a dynamic organ. It's constantly processing energy, and it's remarkably resilient. In fact, under the right conditions, it can start shedding fat and regenerating in a matter of days. When you fix those underlying metabolic drivers, liver fat decreases really quickly. So, clearing that jam really comes down to these fundamental pillars: improving your diet quality, managing your weight, getting up and increasing your physical activity, and optimizing your sleep. When you do these things, you aren't just treating a single organ, you're clearing the highways, you are restoring flow. This means fatty liver doesn't have to be a life sentence. Instead, you can look at it as an incredibly valuable piece of feedback from your body, a very clear signal telling you that your current metabolic environment just needs a bit of an upgrade. Which brings us to the most important question of all. See, the goal isn't just asking, how do we suck the fat out of the liver? The real, deeper question we must ask ourselves is, how do we restore metabolic balance throughout the entire body? Because when we fix the whole system, the liver heals itself. We'll be uncovering the exact nutritional strategies to do just that in our next explainer. Thanks so much for learning with us today.